In this intimate, cinematic drama, Maya Hawke, a modest, quietly proud woman with a past in jewelry design, endures public humiliation when a Jade store clerk bars her entry for looking of place. The confrontation ignites a chain of events that exposes class prejudice, the brittle theater of status, and the delicate commerce of dignity. Her husband, Farhan Malik, a billionaire who has intentionally kept his business identity private, reveals he owns the Jade boutique to defend her, an act that both rescues and complicates Maya's sense of self. As the spectacle grows, Maya must decide whether to accept protection, perform a role the world expects of her, or reclaim agency on her own terms. Through verdant imagery, tactile scenes of stone and hand, and the slow reweaving of trust, the story explores ambition, shame, redemption, and the quiet reclamation of power. The jade in the window caught the light in a way that seemed to slow time. It held within it a whole, patient world, deep river greens like the underside of a leaf, veined with white like old scars, polished to a smoothness that suggested a hand had learned to be careful over centuries. The shop, Jade House, a narrow, tasteful storefront with frosted script on the glass, was a pocket of hushed opulence tucked between a bakery and a laundromat on a busy street. People passed and glanced, as if at a ritual space. There was a gravity to it, as if each piece inside were an answer to some question they had not yet thought to ask. Maya stood outside and looked in. Rain from last night had left the city lacquered and metallic, and her umbrella, folded and damp at her elbow, tilted slightly toward the shop like a companion acknowledging a fondness from a distance. She had not meant to come into this part of town. She had been walking home from the hospital. Monira's ward had a late appointment, and detoured, as she sometimes did, to let her feet decide. The light had drawn her the way the night draws a moth. Sometimes that's how the good things happen, accidental, almost by mistake. She pushed at the door with the sleeve of her cardigan rather than her hand, because small, deliberate motions calmed the thunder of her chest. The bell sang, a clean, sheltered chime, and she stepped into a room that smelled of warm wood and lemon oil. The air here seemed denser, measured, like breath held for something exquisite. A young woman at the counter looked up. Store uniform, a black blouse with a jade pin that was a stylized leaf, hair pulled tight into a bun. Her eyes skimmed Maya from head to toe the way a scanner might read a barcode. There was curiosity, then the habitual calculation of someone who worked within a currency of appearances. "Can I help you?" the young woman asked. "Just looking?" Maya said. Her voice had the soft clarity she saved for strangers. She had learned early not to stake anything on loudness. She had been loud enough once, when she was younger and reckless, but sound had become expensive. The young woman's gaze settled on Maya's clothes, a well-worn cardigan with a small patch of pilling near the elbow, a simple cotton dress, shoes that had seen too many winters. Her purse, a practical fold-over satchel, was smooth and unadorned. Perhaps the cashier measured something in the absence of certain marks: no designer label, no showy watch, no sculptural handbag. She closed the ledger in front of her with the margin of a hand and set it aside. "We don't allow outside photography," she said, as if addressing the air. "And we have a limit on browsing time." "I wasn't," Maya began. "Madam," the young woman said, and the title carried a civility that was also distance. "We can't let you." Another movement, a small one, that felt like a protective reflex. Maya noted it, as if from a distance. The cashier's posture shifted. She placed herself between Maya and the glass case like a sentinel. Maya's cheeks warmed. The shop had a small cohort of people clustered by the counter, a man in a soft blazer with a toddler in hand, an older woman with a carved wooden cane, a middle-aged couple who spoke in low, private currents. The man with the toddler's eyes flicked to the doorway, then looked away quickly. "Are you asking me to leave?" Maya asked. The cashier's face smoothed into a practiced smile. We only allow customers who meet certain criteria, she began. Maya's hand tightened on the strap of her bag. The phrase was like a blade. Criteria. Membership, the cashier said. And appointments. Maya's laugh was a small, odd thing. I'm just looking, like I said, she said. I appreciate your store. She trailed off because the words that mattered felt suddenly embarrassed in her mouth. She had not meant to make a scene. She had come here because the green was beautiful and reminded her of the river back home. She had come here because someone once told her to let herself look at things, and she had believed them. The young woman did not budge. I'm sorry, she said, and the form of apology was sharp and final. If you can't show proof of membership, I'll have to ask you to leave. An older woman at the counter reached out and with the gentlest of gestures pressed a small package of jade beads into the cashier's hands. The cashier held them like a favor. She glanced around as if to seek counsel, an anchor. Madam, the cashier said once more, softer now but still in order. Maya felt something in her chest, a hot pressure like a kettle beginning to steam. For a heartbeat, she wondered at her own reaction. Why this mattered so much? It was, she realized, because she had come to this city to be unseen and had learned instead to measure herself against the world that expected to be seen. She had been taught, in whispers and in the tones of men and women who took up too much room, to make herself small. The cashier's dismissal felt like a physical narrowing. It was a removal from a space she had not known she had been permitted to want. She turned to go. Her umbrella caught the doorframe, and she apologized as if she had committed a private clumsiness. Outside, the rain had resumed its slow, cleansing work. Maya walked without looking back. The next morning, the city buzzed with a different kind of electricity. By noon, what had been a quiet personal bruise had become a rumor. Someone had recorded the exchange, an unintended camera, a passerby's phone, and uploaded it. The footage was grainy. The cashier's voice was a soft, clipped syllable. But the headline that threaded through people's mornings was clear and hungry. JD soap EJ6 IMPL mon, Melion IRD fans aus Wifi. It landed in Maya's inbox like a pebble dropped into still water. A friend, the only friend who would assume it mattered, had circled the story with a small set of punctuation marks that looked like concern. Her phone vibrated and vibrated, calls from journalists, messages from old colleagues who had not spoken in years. A small, flaring storm. Maya read and then closed her phone. The swell of attention felt strange, a tide that had nothing to do with her intentions. She thought of the green light of the jade and how quickly light could be refracted into spectacle. She imagined being made a thing. She hated that image. She wanted to be anonymous again. She wanted to be the woman who walked to the market, who fried pancakes for Monira, and who mended the hem of her nephew's coat at midnight. She wanted to remain the unremarkable constants that made her life survivable. But the city has a way of refusing to relent. It arrived at her doorstep, a bouquet of lilies with an attached card that said, "Precious things should be handled gently." A bouquet of orchids from a stranger who called himself a concerned patron. A camera crew across the street from her building like a swarm of curious wasps. She called Farhan at work because there was nothing else to do. He picked up on the first ring. "You sound far away," he said. "Near," she corrected. "I'm on the third floor. They're outside." Farhan's laugh was low and even. "Let them stare," he said. "Do you want me to come home?" "No," she answered. New behaviors came copper, bright and quick when she had to make them. "I don't want them to make a scene for me." "You shouldn't have to hide, because other people are thoughtless," he said. She could hear him in his office, the tap of keys, the distant cadence of urgent business. "Farhan Malik," His name carried in the city like a tide: Malik Holdings, Malik Philanthropy, Malik Construction, Malik Hotels. He kept the company of headlines and the discreet murmurs of boardrooms. He also kept small habits bordering on ritual: an old teapot from his grandmother, a stack of battered travel journals, a series of cassette tapes he liked to play in the car. They had been married 5 years, and he still left notes on the kitchen counter with jokes that made her laugh, even when she did not want to. "You don't have to come at all," she said, and there was something like an apology in it. "You don't even want me to come to your defense?" he asked with mock offense. "I don't want to be defended as if I were fragile," she said. "I want to be allowed to be here without it having to be about anyone else." There was a brief pause on the line, the kind where a person counts everything in their head before the next move. "I'll be home soon," he said. Farhan closed his laptop at 2 o'clock. He walked out of glass and steel with the quiet purpose of a man who kept his life highly organized. The city seemed to part for him in invisible seams. A driver's door opened. A light changed at an intersection. A concierge tipped his hat. For all the power he carried, he still felt at his most true when he stepped into the ordinary, the key in the lock, the scent of boiling tea, the slip of paper that said, "Buy coriander," taped to the fridge. He found Maya by the kitchen sink, the sunlight filtering through a curtain and making a square of gold on the floor. Papers from the day lay in a small, unconscious pile. When she saw him, her shoulders dropped an inch. She had not wanted him to rescue her, but she also did not want him to see her as anything other than whole. "Tell me what happened," he said. She told him, and he watched the light on her face like he was learning a landscape. He did not interrupt. He waited for the edges to settle. When she finished, he breathed out a wordless sound. "That was beneath them," he said. "It was beneath me," she said. "I felt ashamed." "I'm so sorry," he said. "I should have been there." "You were at work," she reminded him. "You have places to be." He leaned forward and took her hands in his. His touch was a language they had both used for years. "My." He stopped. The word billion, the word owner, hovered between them. There were things he had kept from her. Not out of secrecy but out of design. He ran parts of his life as private islands because he liked the surprise of anonymity. There were companies and trusts and holdings arranged in ways that pleased his sense of order. He had never meant to exclude her, but business is a jealous thing. It demanded a shape that sometimes required that he not drag home the entire world in its glint. "And do you want me to go to the store?" he asked, and there was nothing performative in the question. Maya looked at him. "No," she said. And then, with a softness that made the word more dangerous than any blade, "Yes. I don't know." He kissed her temple. "Whatever you decide," he said. "I will not make you into a spectacle." But Farhan had a different language for justice. He believed, perhaps Nar Veli, that power could be used to make wrongs right. He also had a long-standing relationship with the store in question. Jade House was a part of the hundreds of small investments he had made over the years, an acquisition made quietly because he liked the way the green stones glowed and because he wanted to preserve a craft that he thought the city was losing. He kept it separate from his name because he liked to sometimes live inside small, anonymous experiments. When the cameras arrived at their building 2 hours later, he chose to walk into the shop rather than let the story be framed without his presence. He did not announce himself outside. He crossed the threshold and the bell chimed again. The same cashier looked up and for a moment could not place the unfamiliar man who moved with the quiet of a person for whom a room was always a place to survey. "We have a problem," he said, and the sentence was small and precise. "A customer was asked to leave yesterday." The cashier blinked. "Sir?" Do you know who that woman was? Farhan asked. She wasn't a member, the cashier said. She is my wife, he said, and in the small silence that followed, the room rearranged itself. The word landed not like a trumpet, but like a stone that changed the flow of water. It altered everything around it. The cashier's expression slid from composure to startled recognition. The older woman who had been examining a pendant took in the sentence and exhaled in a way that looked like a soft, private apology. The man with the toddler shifted, his hand tightening on the child's shoulder. You own this store? The cashier asked, incredulous now because the world had a habit of pretending to be separate from its owners. Farhan smiled in a way that was not triumphal. He searched her face as if looking for the point from which the misjudgment had sprung. I own it, he said, and I do not allow my staff to treat people like they are less than. There were flashes at the edge of the room, phones turning, people whispering. The footage from the day before had become a motif for public imagination. The video of the woman, the soft brutality of a dismissal, the billionaire's arrival, the slow reveal. It would make for a satisfying arc in a paper, a convenient binary of villain and savior. But the reality was naughtier. The cashier's mouth formed an apology the way a person might learn a foreign word. Her manager, a woman with immaculate hair and a sharper jaw, the person who had the authority to issue rules, appeared from the back room. Her expression flattened to professional concern. Why enforce store policy? She said. What cannot allow people to? You cannot bar someone from being in your shop because of how they look, Farhan said. I want an apology to be issued. To the woman, publicly. The manager's face hardened. Our membership policy exists because you can't be bothered to look beneath first impressions. Farhan's voice was quieter now, but there was steel within it. I'll buy the membership for everyone who was denied yesterday, and I'll have a sign placed at the door that says, explicitly, all are welcome. The manager opened her mouth, as if to come back. But there are decisions people make in the face of money and others they make in the face of consequence. She nodded because it was the simplest currency that would keep the store functioning. Outside the bell of the shop, the cameras were less kind. They had already framed the sequence before it began. The video of the woman, the millionaire husband sweeping in to redress things. By evening, the clip had been edited, layered with captions, sampled with between takes commentary. The world loved crisp stories. It loved when the righteous were defended by the powerful. It loved the neatness of an end. Maya watched it all but said very little. When Farhan returned home that night, the house smelled of jasmine and tea. He entered with a worn book under his arm and a note of fatigue softened by purpose. You did what? She asked instead of greeting him. I did what I thought was right, he said. You rescued me, she said. The word felt a gamble. She put her hand on the kettle to slow the tremor she would not make visible. You said you didn't want to be rescued, he said. I didn't mean to sound ungrateful, she said. But I didn't want to have to be saved by your name. He came to stand beside her, and he watched her pour tea the way a man watches her ritual he has been lucky enough to observe. I understand, he said. I thought it would make things better. Better for who? She asked. The question was quieter than she meant it to be, and his face went still. There are unspoken economies in relationships, favors owed, boundaries assumed, gestures that mean devotion in one language and erasure in another. Maya felt, in that moment, a rawness she had not had the courage to examine before. She loved him. She loved him the way you love someone who gives you small, unheralded joys, the grocery run that comes with a joke, the way he repaired a broken chair without asking. But she also feared what it meant to be put on display as an ornament of his conscience. You didn't ask me what I wanted, she said. You didn't let me respond. He rested his forehead against hers. You're right, he said. I should have asked. I thought you would want me to take the stage, she finished. No. It's easier to stop other people from hurting you than to teach you how to stop them from defining you, he said, with the faintest wryness. He was confessing something he had not realized he needed to say. He too had been learning. The days that followed were thorny. The city loved his intervention, and headlines turned their bright teeth toward the store's policy change and the billionaire with the gentle solutions. But not everyone's response was simple gratitude. There were columns that praised his generosity and others that questioned his motives. Was he trying to cultivate a philanthropic image? Was this a PR stunt? A handful of op-eds suggested that his publicness served only to manufacture grievance for the cameras. Maya read the pieces that supported her and the ones that suspected her, and found herself irritated that the same story could be told with such different intentions. She resented being the object of anyone's story. She went back to the shop once at dawn, with the city still sleepy and the air crisp and clean. She walked, not to create more spectacle, but because the green had not left its tug on her. The shop's door was open, the new sign curt and blunt AR welcome. There was a line of sunlight curling across the floor like a river. Inside, a display case held a small pendant, a piece of jade that looked like a pebble and held within it the ghost of a leaf. She picked it up with the same reverence people used when touching relics. Her fingers fit around the stone, as if it had been waiting for her. The manager was present. She recognized Maya and offered a small, carefully measured smile. The owner has been very generous, she said. He did what he thought was right, Maya said. She looked at the woman, Nadia, the manager, who had dismissed her in such a breathless, mechanical way. Nadia's face was the architecture of someone who believed in order and in the safety of rules. She was not cruel in an obvious manner. Her cruelty, if one could call it that, had been procedural. The store ran on decorum as much as it did on inventory. You must understand, Nadia said. A store like this gets people who... Who? Maya asked gently. Who you think don't belong. Nadia's mouth tightened. Who could upset the ambience, she said. We have wealthy customers who seek privacy. It's a store, Maya said, and the truth was simple and fierce. It is not an invitation to judge. Nadia's expression stung with the memory of being told something she had not meant to be cruel about. Policies keep things running smoothly, she said, almost reflexively. You were doing what you were taught to do, Maya said. You were following a script. And what would you have had me do? Nadia demanded. Trust every woman who walks in wearing a cardigan. See them, Maya said. That is all. See them first. Nadia looked at Maya with an intensity that pressed into the air between them. For a moment, something like shame passed across her face. She was younger than Maya by a decade at most, and there was in her something brittle that had likely been honed into efficiency because it had been the only thing that paid her rent. I am sorry, she said. I didn't know. You judged me, Maya said, and the word was not a hammer but a lens. You judged a book by its cover. Nadia's eyes filled with tears so quickly she blinked as if surprised. She swallowed. I am sorry, she said again, and this time it belonged to her. I didn't think. I was afraid of making mistakes. Maybe it's okay to make mistakes, Maya said. Maybe apology is the start. She left the shop then, not with the pomp of a newly minted member, but with a small pendant wrapped in tissue paper and slipped into her purse. She walked into the morning light and felt, oddly, lighter. The jade had not saved her. It had simply been a mirror she had forgotten she owned. There was an arc you did not see at first, the way the story reconfigured things at nest levels. The footage that had made the city gasp led to a ripple of small changes. A group of women formed a petition to insist all upscale shops display inclusivity guidelines. A journalist wrote an editorial about class and taste. A podcast host interviewed Maya about the experience, and she, with an economy of words that surprised even her, spoke about being seen. She did not bask in the attention. She used it like a tool to hold a workshop for local artisans, to speak quietly at a community center about making jewelry without the cloud of celebrity. She had been a designer once, years ago, in a smaller life, before life had taught her that to exist economically required sacrifices that were not reconcilable with art. The attention allowed her a small room in which she could start again. Farhan watched this with the same mixture of awe and trepidation he had toward her whole life. He loved her the way people love the parts of the world that are stubbornly true. He did not like that his intervention had seeded a new public role for her that might feel imposed. Sometimes the currency of choice is not the absence of help, but the presence of consent. One evening, after a long day of teaching a class about stone setting at the community center, she returned home and found him tending to the small herb garden on their balcony, his fingers stained with earth. "You did well today," he said. "I taught people how to basil set a cabochon," she replied, and he laughed because he loved the way she always returned to the details. "I meant you," he said. "You held the room." "That wasn't difficult," she allowed. "They wanted to learn." He came to her then with a small, folded envelope. "I placed a seed fund for the artisans," he said. Farhan had many accounts in confidential ledgers. He would never be truly anonymous to those who spent time in the business of finance. "It's a small thing, I thought." "You thought?" She raised an eyebrow. "I thought it might help you build something that belongs to you." The tenderness in his voice was a lighthouse. "Not because I want to rescue you, but because I want to support you." She sat down on the balcony chair and opened the envelope. Inside was a simple letter: "Seed Fund for Maya Hacks Artisan Collective. Funds controlled by a board of women including you." The handwriting at the bottom was his. A small, looping script she had seen on grocery lists. It felt like an offering rather than an edict. "You could have asked me about this," she said. "I could have," he said. "And you would have said, 'No, perhaps, because you fear anything that's wrapped in my name.' But I wanted to be useful in a way that didn't make the story about me." "You just did in the paper," she said, with a small smile. He did not deny it. They argued, in that quiet way two people do when they care about the architecture of trust. He wanted to be helpful and could not always remember where the line between assistance and taking over lay. She wanted autonomy and the right to choose failure or success on her own terms. The argument did not end in fireworks. It ended in the softer surrender of conversation. That night they lay awake and talked about small things: the music they liked at dawn, the favorite poems that comforted them. The next morning, Farhan met with a lawyer and rewound the fund, stipulating that control rested primarily with an advisory board where Maya had an equal vote. He removed his name from the banner. He learned something about letting go. It was a clumsy, beautiful thing to watch a man practice humility. In time, the jade pendant found a new life. Maya wore it as an anchor at her throat, not as a trophy of a public rescue, but as a reminder of what she had been given by the world and what she had reclaimed of herself. She started the collective with a small group: Lena, her friend from the market who could spin stories better than most; Samir, a former assistant at the shop who had apologized so earnestly that Maya had given him a second chance; and two elderly artisans who had taught her the old ways of working stone with a patient hand. They rented a tiny space above a seamstress's shop, painted the walls a gentle green, and hung simple shelves where stones and wire could rest like sleeping things. Their first show was not grand. It was a table of work by the river, the light catching on each piece as if the pieces had always belonged there. People came with curiosity. Some were drawn by the story of the woman who had been dismissed, others came for the simple pleasure of support. There were mistakes, a bezel that went crooked, a wire that refused to behave. But there was also laughter, the kind that comes from people sharing tasks and the knowledge that no one is the sum of a single moment. Farn attended, of course, arriving with a cooler of iced tea and a grin as if he were at a picnic. He did not stand at the front. He sat with Maya's mother on a bench, his presence steady and unobtrusive, when a journalist approached asking leading questions about the origins of the collective and the role of his money. Maya answered herself. This started because a woman wanted to look at a stone. She said, and the sentence held both the simplicity and the vastness of their journey. There are small ironies in the world. The man who had the power to break things had also, through a clumsy public intervention, given her a sliver of oxygen to breathe. But perhaps the truest redemption in the story was that Maya did not accept the rescue as the final note. She used it as raw material. She turned the embarrassment into a workshop, the spectacle into mentorship, the headline into a course for apprentices who had never belonged to anything that asked them to stay. Months slid into a year. The boutique above the seamstress's shop became known for something more than goods. It became a place where the green of Jade was measured not by its price but by the story it carried. People came and brought fragments of their own lives, a grandmotherhood's lost locket that someone soldered back together, a first earnings necklace made by a young man with a trimmer in his hands. Maya's hands grew steadier. She placed a small dish by the door with a simple note to UhonlwuYth Ganali Hanans. It was both instruction and promise. On the first anniversary of the incident, the phone buzzed with gentle messages rather than inflammatory ones. Farhan and Maya sat on the balcony with 2 cups of tea and watched the city like 2 people who had stood in a river and discovered that their feet were stronger when they moved together. You changed the sign, Maya said. You put the sign at Jade House. He nodded. It was the least I could do. You could also have asked me first, she said, and there was a softness in it, not the old accusation, but the memory of how they had learned to speak. And you could have told me you wanted to look at the pendant yesterday, he said, and they both laughed in the way people do when they find the sharp edges worn smooth. Near their feet, the pendant, her pendant, caught the light and shivered like a small creature waking. For a long time it had been a symbol of being looked at. Now it was a witness to how a woman learned to step into light and how a man learned the patient art of not making people into stories for his own redemption. They had both been humbled in different ways. In the end, the city moved on. New stories braided through the old ones, and Jade House persisted as a name on a street. The cashier returned to work and eventually became a buyer for a small chain. She had learned the blunt cost of presumption. The manager read a book about diversity and quietly made changes in company policy. Maya kept teaching. Farhan kept building foundations. Their lives continued, threaded with ordinary days and with the occasional tremor of public memory. On a quiet afternoon, as sunlight burned like honey across the floorboards and the city breathed slow and even, Maya stood in front of the window of a small classroom beneath her studio where a boy was learning how to measure a piece of stone. She watched him as he listened, focused and proud. The pendant at her throat was cool and ordinary and perfect. There are moments in a life that feel like turning, small pivots rather than the dramatic snapping of fate. The moment of being asked to leave a shop could have been a sentence. It had almost been. But life, as Maya had learned, is stubborn. It yields in ways that are not always tidy. The humiliation had not been undone by a billionaire's announcement. It had been transformed by a woman's decision to carve out a place for herself where she would not be judged by the softness of her cardigan or the quietness of her voice. She touched the green screen stone and smiled, because that is what courage often becomes: the decision to keep looking, to keep making, to keep asking. The city kept its hum. The river kept its slow, patient work. The jade, cold and perfect, sat against her skin as proof that beauty is not a possession but a practice. And that belonging is something you teach yourself, piece by careful piece.